Meanwhile, another big story today. The House is getting ready to vote on the renewal of the FISA Act. A proposed amendment with growing bipartisan support would limit the authority of intelligence agents to collect foreign communications involving Americans. But we do not know if that amendment will pass. Have a listen.
Our amendment stands for the simple proposition that when you want to spy on Americans, get a warrant.
The bill as stands is completely unacceptable.
We believe there are millions of pieces of information on Americans in that database. That should not be looked at without a warrant, but even with a warrant should not be used for domestic crime.
Well, that man you heard from is Senator Republican Rand Paul of Kentucky. How you doing, sir? And welcome back here. I understand you spoke to the president last hour. Did you talk about this?
I did, and I think he's concerned that we need more oversight of the intelligence communities like we are. It's one thing to spy on foreigners in foreign lands, and that's what the FISA Act is supposed to do. We actually will reauthorize it. That's part of our reform. We reauthorize spying on foreigners in foreign lands. But millions of Americans are accidentally or incidentally collected in this database, and we don't want people willy-nilly just looking into this database without a warrant. Because, see, there's evidence now that some people in the FBI had a bias against the president and tried to get him defeated while at work. We're discussing among each other how to have an insurance policy. We had people at the Justice Department who worked with, or whose spouse was with the opposition research group hired by the Clintons. So you can see how men are not angels, as Madison said. So what we have to do is make sure that somebody's watching and that there are checks and balances. The essential check and balance in our country for looking at someone's stuff, invading someone's house to gather their information, is a judicial warrant. This is supposed to separate the police from the judicial aspect of this to protect people from bias.
Okay. You've been on this issue for years. Are you ready to filibuster yet again?
You know, I don't know if I have 13 hours in me. I've been through a lot in the last couple of months, but I will tell you this, that the Bill of Rights is something worth filibustering over, and that the idea that we should have a judicial warrant before searching an American's records absolutely is worth filibustering for. We have bipartisan support for this. This vote will be interesting to watch this morning because we think we have the votes. All night long, Republican and Democratic leadership have been twisting arms and trying to bribe people to change their votes because we think we're going to beat them this morning.
Wow.
The other thing you have to watch
you think this amendment will pass?
I think it's going to be very, very close. We'll see what happens. Also watch them because they need to be held accountable if they pull the vote at the last minute because they're going to lose.
Okay, we'll
because
watch
they
all
need to
that. Let's see what happens over time. But just take me back to the White House and the conversation with the president. What does he specifically support on this?
Well, you know, the administration has voiced support for reauthorization, but I think that the president indicated to me that he believes that any reauthorization should have significant reforms, meaning that you should have to have a warrant to look at Americans' records. You have to realize that all of us are caught up in this. If I talk to an ambassador or I talk to anybody outside the country, somehow I'm in the database. The president's in the database. Michael Flynn's in the database. Any journalist who sends an email to someone overseas and mentions the name of a terrorist, let's say you're writing a story about a terrorist, because you've mentioned a terrorist, now you and your counterpart overseas, who may be another reporter, are now caught up in the database. There are so many millions of Americans in the database. We should not be searching Americans if you're not involved with terrorism or not connected to a terror target. We shouldn't allow willy-nilly anybody to look at all this information.
The reason I specifically asked about the president, because here's the tweet from earlier today on FISA. Here's where it came out about 7 o'clock this morning. House votes on controversial FISA Act today. This is the act that may have been used with the help of the discredited and phony dossier to so badly surveil and abuse the Trump campaign by the previous administration and others, he asked with a question mark. That tweet came out about 12 hours after this statement came from the White House late last night. The administration urges the House to reject this amendment and preserve the useful role FISA's Section 702 authority plays in protecting American lives. That in itself seems like it's a contradiction. Can you clear it up?
I think that you can be for reauthorization and also for reauthorization with reform. And so I think, you know, the president speaks for himself, but I do believe that the president supports reform and does not believe that we should allow anybody to look through this database without a warrant. We've seen how much bias there is. We've seen top-ranking people, the FBI, top-ranking people, the Justice Department, whose political bias has gotten the better of them. They brought their political bias to work, and then they have this enormous power. Realize that we have the ability to listen to every phone call in Italy for an entire month. There was a report from a year or two ago where we soaked up every phone call in Italy for an entire month. This is an enormous power, and we have to be watching the watchers. We have to have congressional oversight, and we need to have judicial oversight, because there's a great deal of abuse that's possible in this system, and I think we have a real good chance of winning this today.
You filibustered twice, right? 2015, 2013. I got a total of 23 hours and 30 minutes. That sound right on your clock?
Right.
Did you change anything?
Wear comfortable shoes. Don't drink too much water. Yeah, there's some things you have to realize.
Did you change anything?
Did I change anything? Yeah, I think so. I mean, when I filibustered the first time, it was about whether or not drones could be used against Americans on American soil, and I finally got President Obama and Eric Holder to admit that they wouldn't do it. But the scary thing was that they wouldn't admit this when I first asked them. It took 13 hours of standing on the floor to get them to sort of acknowledge they wouldn't do something atrocious, which is use a weaponized drone on American soil.
Yeah. Immigration, quickly, is there a deal to be made here or not?
I think so, and I think what you're finding, is that conservatives will compromise on this if we get border security, but that's a big if. And really, I believe immigration reform has died in the past because Democrats are unwilling to compromise. Democrats have said we want everything or we'll get nothing. DACA is something that now a lot of people are okay with trying to figure out a reform on, but it has to involve border security, it has to involve getting rid of the diversity lottery, and it has to involve getting rid of chain migration.
Thank you, sir. Come on back, all right? Rand Paul will watch the vote in the House, and then we'll come back to you and see what your next move is. Thank you, sir, very much from the Hill. Also,